Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Coffee Break Talks here in the National Library of Latvia. I am honored to be here and talk about the digital technologies. My name is Lolita Bērziņa, and I do kind of represent two branches. I do represent the University of Latvia as a researcher there, and my field of research is human rights and new technologies with an emphasis on the data protection. I also do work at the Constitutional Court where human rights and fundamental freedoms are also one big topic. And I'm delighted to be here with my colleague Anna Vladimirova-Krjukova, who is also a lawyer, but she knows a lot about digital technologies. She's also a data protection specialist, so welcome.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me here, and it's a real pleasure also to be here and to speak about this interesting topic. I'm also a lawyer. I work at the law office. I'm a certified data protection officer, both on Latvian and on the European level. So on one side, I work and my certificate imposes certain obligations on me, to protect and to care about data subjects and privacy things. But on the other side, I work a lot with business in the law office, and you see what is the balance between business needs and privacy needs. It's very interesting.
It certainly is, and especially nowadays when our understanding of human rights in general is shifting. And I mean, it has changed a lot since the 1950s, when the first human rights documents were adopted. But especially now, when we have the digital technologies that move our society even faster, maybe not always in the directions we are aware of. So I guess we can start our conversation with just general remarks, maybe about where are we going. Because, for example, on one hand, we have all the social networks and other internet intermediaries and other operators online that are saying, to put it in the words of Mark Zuckerberg, that the privacy is simply not the norm anymore. On the other hand, I think we all do remember May 25 last year, all the fuss and craziness around the GDPR and adoption of the new EU regulation on data protection. So on one hand, we have this society which is kind of moving in a direction where we share all the information we have online. On the other hand, we still want that privacy. So where do you think we are going with all of this?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for the question. First of all, I think that when the first data protection and human rights instruments were introduced, the situation was not also ideal. Yeah, so they were introduced because we needed to make the situation better, because there were certain problems with that and also with privacy. Yes, and I would say that maybe privacy is a bit better right now, because okay, we didn't have such technologies before that, but still I was not sure that an individual was protected in such a big amount, and especially from state authorities and their surveillance of a citizen. But well, it depends, on which state we're talking about and which country we're talking about. And I think that of course business tends to say that people are sharing information, that not really interested in this in privacy, because they're willing to show what they're doing every day, what they're doing in their bathroom, in their private space. So come on, who's speaking about the GDPR and all that data protection when individuals don't care about it themselves? But I was kind of such person, that was like really also, I used to be a purely human rights person before I started working at a law office with businesses. So also had such a conception that everything should be private and have a personal space, which should have this personal space. But then I started working with businesses, and I also had problems with adopting new technologies, because, well, I knew that they spy on us, that they use our data for marketing purposes. Then I understood that actually this is not our fault. The society is developing, the technologies are developing. It's not bad to use them. You know, you can still live somewhere in the countryside and avoid using cars and only ride horses just because like cars are not safe. Of course they're not always safe. Yes, but technologies are also, well, not always safe and are not also privacy compliant. But it doesn't mean that you should avoid using them. It means that those who provide those technologies should ensure the compliance with the GDPR, should use the data that we provide to them only for purposes that are legitimate and that are compliant both with GDPR and any other human rights requirement. And this is also this is related not only to private parties like Facebook but also to state actors, because we know that certain countries are introducing new solutions how to spy on people, on their own people, and it's also not very good. And I think that technologies that we use and the fact that we share information, I know, on Facebook, on any social media, does not mean anything bad. And it does not mean a self-declaration that I don't need privacy. That just means that I love this technology, but these people who provide this technology to me should also care about my privacy and all that compliance thing. So, well, I use social media, and of course I'm aware of the risks. I know that my data is maybe somewhere out there, and most probably I will not ever be able to use the right to be forgotten. This is your topic, yes, but still I guess that we need to fight for that, both for technology and both for compliance, because they should go hand in hand. And you maybe also have heard, I think that you have of course have heard about Cambridge Analytica case, yes.
As everybody.
Yeah, so, but still I think that we need to fight, and we need not stay neutral and say that, well, okay, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I think that I completely agree with you that technology is, I mean, it's here, and it is here to stay, basically, and it's up to us on how we manage it, on how we create the rules and everything. For me, it's just very interesting to see that when internet was introduced in the 90s and in the previous century, it was thought to be this magnificent place with the centralization. There's no government there, and everybody is free to do whatever they want. But now we see that the players online are getting bigger and bigger. They are, I mean, again, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's a good thing because we all know where to go and where to look for the information, and most probably it's a bad thing for smaller players there. And it might be a bad thing for the governments, maybe trying to impose some kind of rules. As we know, all the biggest online players were involved in the drafting of the GDPR. They all expressed their opinions, and now they're, interestingly enough, they're actually now the ones pushing for, at least some of them, for some kind of GDPR for the United States, for the federal regulation for privacy, which is non-existent now. So why do you think, like, where do you see the role of these big companies that are basically ruling the internet for now?
Well, I heard a very interesting point at one of the biggest European tech conferences, Web Summit, where actually one of the biggest companies' representatives told that, well, it's very hard times because when, as you said, there was a moment when there was like internet was something new and fresh, and there were a lot of companies with new ideas. Governments maybe were partly happy that the business is developing, and they lost that momentum where they should intervene. Yes, some of them use social media for certain purposes, like we may have seen at Cambridge Analytica movie, in Cambridge Analytica movie, but still that many technology and big technological companies say that they feel that government there lost that moment where they should have intervened with the regulation and also with regards to competition, because there are companies that use data and provide other services. And we see that European Commissioner, who was also used to be in charge of competition, is now also in charge of digital affairs in the European Union. And she's very widely known for her actions against big companies in the European Union. And now government tries to catch up and to regulate. And we see that this is the problem also with the GDPR, that although it has been there for a while in the form of a directive and convention and Convention 108, but still there was not so big fines, and this is why the GDPR was such a big shock for everybody, because the governments finally decided to intervene and to regulate the sphere, and this was a not very welcome move, although they participated in the elaboration of the GDPR. And what is also one of the problems, I guess, is that as I also heard that government missed the moment to be trained enough to know what is happening behind the curtains of big companies, how all that marketing, targeting works, how the data sharing works. They don't know so much about technologies, and it's very hard to introduce new legal acts without knowing such things in details. And so that we have technological giants who speak one language in government that sometimes speak the same language, but not always. And then they're trying to understand each other, and we see that there are some problems that also can be seen as a political conflicts, sometimes also between several countries. Sometimes we can see that there are some fines are imposed, and there are kind of misunderstanding why and how, and what is the reason why it was not possible to warn us. Yes, but this is a very interesting process where society is one kind of stakeholder, government, and thus big tech actors who have an enormous influence try to share the place together.
Yeah, and that all takes place within a field that is constantly developing itself. So there are some commentators that are basically saying that GDPR was already old when it was adopted. Basically, that it failed to tackle some aspects of the technologies that are now being introduced, and that we already need some new amendments towards that. But you mentioned a very interesting aspect, the fines imposed by GDPR. That was one of the, I guess, biggest things discussed, that, oh my God, now we have those huge fines, and they will kill some businesses if imposed on them. And the GDPR, it's so complex, and it will be so easy for maybe for the state agencies to limit the activities of the businesses by imposing these big fines. And from the human rights perspective, it was used by the advocates of freedom of expression, saying, well, you see, now we have this law that basically says you cannot speak about you cannot use personal data in speech, and if you will, then see, you have these huge fines, and that will lead to a chilling effect, and because people will be afraid to talk. And actually, I think we did see that for some time, when we have had those jokes around that, oh, I cannot take a picture of you, or oh, I cannot. The doctor cannot use the name of a patient in the hospital or whatever. So, have you seen, like, what are your thoughts on this? Do you see it as a big issue, those big fines versus the freedom of expression?
Well, if you speak about freedom of expression, I would say that I have a feeling that while elaborating the GDPR, the question of freedom of speech was still open. And as previously, the previous directive, as well as the GDPR, stated that, freedom of speech is not really the competence of the European Union. It's a matter of each separate country. And it's kind of tricky, because the rules are more or less similar, but for instance, in Latvia, there is a local law on data processing, and the law basically says that all of the, if you speak about journalists, all the rules of the GDPR, all the main principles of the GDPR are applicable to journalists. But, and there are certain exceptions, and this is really very hard to understand. Where is the border between journalism and already data compliance? And I know that journalists are not very confident what is their place in data protection. But I think that but the local data protection authority is not also willing to say a lot about this, because freedom of speech is not really in their competence. And I guess one of the main solutions that we can use here is still the practice on the European level, and the level of the European Court of Human Rights, because there were many decisions of freedom of speech, and you can use certain criteria here from those decisions to see where is the border between freedom of speech and where is the border of processing data for your own purposes, or for that yellow interest that is not really about freedom of speech but about some kind of economical interest of earning money from people who are willing to see some dirty news and dirty information. Another interesting aspect here is that, first of all, of course, it's easier to speak about journalists, such people who work at the registered media. But the freedom of speech is not also about classical journalists. It's also about blogs, about any internet posts. And where there was a previous GDPR text project, there was one of the provisions in the introductory part of the GDPR that freedom of speech and journalism is related not only to strict interpretation of journalists, but any expression of thought, something like that. And this was very interesting, because strictly saying that means that anyone who is willing to post any information on social media is now subject from one side to the same regulation as journalists are. From the one side are also accepted from complying with the data protection requirements. And you know that you can write pretty strange things on Facebook and create pretty strange groups there and make pretty strange bubbles there, and still it will be considered a freedom of speech. So the border is not clear yet, and I think that the most proper regulation, the most proper orientation here that we can use is that European Court of Human Rights and maybe some kind of local practice were on journalists.
Yeah, I do agree. And the many cases actually in the European Court of Human Rights are a very illustrative example that it's not easy to determine where freedom of expression ends and where the right to privacy starts. And there is a very big gray area. I think now the GDPR says that freedom of expression and journalism should be understood broadly. Not saying that everybody is covered, but then again, not saying who is and who isn't. I think in this case, a very good document to look at is the recommendation on new notion of the media by Council of Europe. It is quite old already, from the 2011, if I'm not wrong. That basically says that yes, we should recognize social media and bloggers and the people who post there as some kind of media, this new media, but we shouldn't award the same rights to professional journalists and to bloggers who have a very small audience or who are not doing it professionally. But we should really see them as transmitters of information as well. And I think this leads me to another topic I wanted to bring up is we discussed that we have social media, we have journalists, we have bloggers, and they all live in this online environment. And it seems that we have so many sides that the information is coming and flowing to us. So our point of view should be very broad. But then we actually see, by looking at the society, that we're talking more and more about radicalization, about people who are living within their own information bubbles. So do you see that these big tech companies maybe have any role in this? And what do you think about maybe they have any duties to ensure that the information we receive is actually diverse? Because it seems that what they're doing now is the complete opposite.
Well, I don't think, or I don't want to think about the fact and accept the fact that maybe from the really beginning, like Mark Zuckerberg and other creators, they had a very evil plan to separate society and rule the world. But we see that where the world is coming, that we have such bubbles, and sometimes, and I guess this is the most dangerous thing, that we have all that freedom of speech, and we have all that targeting, and where we are put in a certain bubble that looks like our interest, but really we're not developing because we live in our own field that we know, and we don't receive any other information that is different from what we read, from what we have already perceived. I think that what is important here is that each individual should be informed about the fact that such things happens, because many of us actually have not been aware that this is happening, and that the information that we see in social media differs based on our interests, or based on our likes, or based on our other activities that we take in social media, and that based also on the activities of other persons who target us, because if you follow a certain group, there is no guarantee that in a year somebody else will take on the group and start like posting some kind of completely other information or political information, I don't know, quite radical information, and you will follow that, and will you perceive that, and you will trust that because it used to be a legitimate source of information for you. So I guess one of the first tasks here is to inform, and this is one of the things for reasons for penalizing, for imposing a fine on Google. That was on the huge fine, that there was a lack of information. So I guess the transparency is one of the main requirements, things to do for such big companies.
Yeah, and maybe transparency, and I guess the general concept of media literacy that we are now discussing a lot. We should maybe add another sub-chapter called social media literacy, and literacy of search engines, and literacy on basically how the internet works nowadays.
Yeah,
maybe that would help.
Yes.
So I see that our time is almost up, and I guess our viewers have many more important and interesting discussions to follow too. So I will say thank you for the discussion. It was a pleasure.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.